The Gravity Forms listener from ListenLayer is the most powerful way to track conversions and other activity on all of the Gravity Forms across your WordPress website. Once the listener is enabled, we can navigate to the features screen to turn on some of the features. If we look specifically at the form activity features, these are the individual features that actually push information into the data layer when activity occurs. For example, the form submissions feature for single step forms will trigger an event called GF form submitted into the data layer, and it will push all this other information from the form as well. You can see in this example code. And that occurs when a successful form submission is completed. This allows you to finally stop using thank you pages and sending individual events into various marketing and analytics platforms to track your conversions. Now, you also note we can track form submissions as well as step changes on multi-step Gravity Forms. We can also easily capture information when forms load on a page, so you can understand form impressions and use this to gather form information and debugging. And we can even collect information when form submissions fail as a result of validation errors because the user hasn't fully filled out the form completely. Now, all of this information can be easily captured inside of Google Tag Manager to build a tracking framework and push into all of your marketing platforms. Some of the features, however, such as the form validation, you might want to just use reporting inside of ListenLayer to keep some of that data separate. Each of these individual features will generate one or more events. And you can see those events here in the event settings. None of these are on because none of our features are turned on. It's also important to note that as variables are pushed into the data layer, they're collected here. So you can see that I have information showing here because I have in this account previously run the Gravity Forms listener. But when you first turn this on, if you've never published your listen layer with features on from Gravity Forms, this screen will be empty because the listener has to actually see form activity, and it'll then start to capture that activity and make it available in this screen. For example, you can see here all of the field values from all of our forms are captured, including, for example, things like form ID that you can use to write rules if you want to dig into the custom data layer values feature. So let's go ahead and turn on all of our form activity. And then we're going to publish our changes, and we'll take a look at this on a live website. So now that we've published our changes through ListenLayer, I'm going to go ahead and do a hard refresh. We're looking at a live website here that has multiple Gravity Forms. And what we'll notice is if we drill into the console, there's a lot of information here, but throughout some of that information, we're going to find events and information that's pushed into the data layer from ListenLayer. You can actually see the ListenLayer account that's running, and you can see the various features that are turned on so that you can more easily debug your setup. But you'll note that there are a couple forms, Gravity Forms here, that actually loaded on the page. And so ListenLayer, because we have the form loaded feature on, has pushed that information into the data layer, which can easily be seen here in the console. You can see, for example, the form ID and the form location and the various form fields. Now, it's important to understand the structure of this. There's always an event to identify that something has been pushed into the data layer. And then there are variables. And in this case, we organize the variables into automatic values, which are things that ListenLayer automatically gathers from the form and makes available in the data layer, as well as custom values. You write rules in ListenLayer to push custom values into the data layer, which is the most powerful feature of ListenLayer. So it's a little easier to take a look at this inside of Google Tag Manager's debug view. And you can see these same events that we saw over here are available as messages. And that's because they're coming from this data layer push. This is listen layer pushing information into the data layer. Google Tag Manager has read that information and made it available in a message over here. In Google Tag Manager, you can write rules to trigger tags and other activity based on these particular custom events. It would be a custom event rule. And you can pull in values from these variables as data layer variables. And those can all be custom. If you're looking to target a specific variable from the data layer, one easy way to get that is to navigate into the console. And let's say we want to get our form ID. I can right click on that and select copy property path. That'll then put the path of the this particular variable into my clipboard, so I can go into Google Tag Manager and create a variable to pull that information. So let's go ahead and fill out these forms. What we'll notice here is that I was not redirected to a thank you page, but we did capture an event because the listener automatically identified the fact that a Gravity form was successfully submitted. And so this is the event that you would want to trigger all of your conversion tracking based on. And you can simply write one trigger that tracks all conversion track or all forms as a single conversion. Or we could, for example, identify the form ID or even write custom values to categorize all of our forms and trigger specific conversions based on the category of the form itself. So here we are taking a look at just a simple multi-step Gravity form to show some of the features from that. The first thing that we'll note is I'm going to attempt to submit the first step. And because I have the feature called form validation turned on, we get an event in our data layer here that identifies that a form submission failed due to validation, and it'll identify the actual errors that occurred. Now I'm going to proceed through my multi-step form. And what we'll see is that we get these step change events as the user progresses through the form itself. And we can identify the step numbers and the step that the user has just started. And those can be used in your tracking strategy to build funnel tracking based on all of your multi-step Gravity forms. And you can see, we see another step change firing. Eventually, as we get to the end of our form, we're going to see that we get a unique event to identify the fact that the form was fully submitted. And that is this GF form step submitted event. And so this would be another trigger that you might want to fire a final conversion based on. Now, we briefly touched on this, but there are other features inside the Gravity Forms listener. Custom data layer values allows you to write really powerful rules inside of listen layer to push custom values into the data layer. So drill into that. It is the most powerful feature within listen layer. You can also push activity after a redirect occurs. So if you have a lot of forms that redirect to a thank you page, this feature can be useful if you want to debug on the following page after a form has been completed. And oftentimes it can help to improve the accuracy of tracking depending on how the forms actually redirect and how your website is working. Once that's on, though, you'll have to turn it on for specific events in this screen. In addition to the custom data layer values, you can write rules that will actually take values or allow you to hard code values in the user's browser as cookies, local storage, and session storage. And that can be very useful if you need to capture information and have that persist and allow other systems to access that in different ways. You can also turn on data layer monitoring, which allows you to write rules to monitor data layer activity. It will send you notifications when specific events occur or don't occur or other advanced conditions are met. So if you're running analytics for one or many websites, you can write some predetermined rules that will help you to monitor the activity on your website. And then finally, you can turn on data layer reporting, which will collect event and data layer information into the reporting feature inside of Listen Layer. For example, you can see here we'll end up with a reporting screen that we can drill into and understand. This can be very useful. For example, if you want to capture form validation data, but not necessarily push that into a tool like Google Analytics.